Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other rambunctious host,
Brian. I think you've used that one before.
Well, check the wiki. Have you ever been on a Wikipedia page? Have you ever been on a wiki page and any description?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Well, I was teeing you up to talk about it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I love Wikipedia pages.
No. Have you ever been featured on a Wikipedia page or listed?
No.
Have you ever seen a Wikipedia page?
Wait, you asked, have I ever been on a Wikipedia page? And it's like, yes, of course.
Say it to yourself again. In your head,
okay. No, I did make significant contributions to the absolute lol cost that was involved in our secondary school vandalism of our secondary school Wikipedia page, which was wonderful. We used to list all the nicknames that one lovely teacher had. He was lovely, actually. His name was Joe. But I use the phrase Holocaust there, not because I think it's appropriate to make fun of the Holocaust, but because that was a thing that people said a lot in 2008. 2007.
It was. I think it's both true that was very much in the slang vernacular, and also I hope it's true that you don't think the Holocaust. I hope it's clear that you don't think the Holocaust is a source of humor.
Yeah, I really don't. I was trying to think there, Holocaust and humor. The only two things I can think are that are connected. Jojo, what was it called? Jojo Rabbit? Is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. Apparently, a very light approach to kind of like Holocaust and from a Jewish perspective, and very polarizing in lots of ways. A lot of people loved it, and I haven't watched it yet, but I do love Taika Waititi. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I can think of is Life is Beautiful, which is, do you remember that Italian movie? Stunning movie, a bit like a lovely man who's a Jewish man who's kind of like amuses his son the whole time, and I mean, it's very funny and moving, but then Holocaust happens and it's incredibly dark, but also he's humorous throughout, and it's anyway. If you actually, it's a great recommendation. If you haven't watched Life is Beautiful, go ahead. Anyway, should we do the Buffy summary?
Have you ever been on Wikipedia, Joel? I have, in fact. I have been featured on Wikipedia.
I know this because before we started going out properly, and before we actually had met, because I was told about you in the sense that I was doing that play and I was given like the cast list, and I googled everyone, and you were in a picture with another person on your Facebook profile picture at the time, and I was like, I hope it's the guy on the right because he's much more attractive, and it turned out it wasn't, but I think you're pretty attractive too.
You can tell me off air who the other person was.
You were the attractive guy, but I found that speech.
Yeah, so I went to a summer camp for precocious overachievers when I was a teenager, and did one of the things I did in the summer camp was drama, and I had a penchant. Are we saying penchant?
Yeah, penchant, okay. I
had a penchant more so even then when I was a teenager for speechifying, much as Buffy does at the end of this episode, except about like minor life stuff. And I gave a similar rousing speech at a graduation event, and it was recorded on this summer camp Wikipedia page for a long time, and then eventually I could contact the webmaster and I was like, please release me from this evidence. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's all to say that we're here to talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 7 episode 10, bring on the night. So this episode was first aired on December 17th, 2002. We just noted that apparently we hadn't noticed this until this episode. The Angel episodes have now become asynchronous with Buffy, so the episode that we're currently on an Angel I think aired in late January. So that's interesting. About a month out.
Yeah. So this is directed by David Grossman. It was who last directed Tabula Rasa, and was written by Marty Noxon, who last wrote Conversations with Dead People, though she was uncredited, and Villains, which she was actually credited. This is her final episode credit, though she's obviously a producer, executive producer, so I'd imagine lots of contributions to the later writings for this season. And it was also written by Doug Petrie, who last wrote Beneath You. And here is your Buffy summary. Giles arrives in Sunnydale with 3 potential slayers, of whom the oldest, Kennedy, makes a play for Willow. Spike is tortured a lot. Buffy meets and is defeated by the Ubervamp, which kills a potential who runs away and then beats Buffy again. She summons the Scoobies and potentials and makes an inspirational speech. That was really like out of order. Anyway, whatever.
It's kind of like Kennedy's obviously the oldest, but how old is she?
Well, she's 2 years younger than Willow as an actor. So,
because I feel like the younger potentials are meant to only be about 14, 15, 16.
Oh, you reckon? I always read 50 and up exclusively,
Like you would hope.
But no, I'd imagine not a teenager for sure.
Yeah.
or if a teenager 19 to Willow's 21, 22, which is...
We're talking more about Kennedy anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so Grace, let's bring on the 9. Before we get into that, we're going to go over to the drive-in theatre over in the Bronx to talk about our big blockbuster surround sound cinema-going experience. So we went to see Denis Villeneuve's Dune.
Denis
Villeneuve's Denis Villeneuve's Dune, which came out here on a limited run, I think 1 week.
Yeah, so they're showing it on HBO Max as well, which we actually can't get in Ireland yet. I think, or it might be available now. If it's available now, it's very recently. But yeah, so it was pushed back for months and months. I think it was supposed to originally come out last June. It's finally come out. And I think we're recording this on a Wednesday, which we usually would record on Tuesday and release on a Wednesday. It would have been great if we had, though, because yesterday Dune 2 was officially announced, which is great. But we went to see it. It was a cinematic experience.
Yeah, absolutely. We went to see in kind of IMAX, which is your full massive shouty screen, big screen, big loudspeaker kind of experience.
It's too close though. It was very pixely, unfortunately.
I'm famous unfamiliar with Dune. It is based on Frank Herbert's 1965 novel of the same name. Often considered one of the first and great science fiction novels. A kind of a famously dense text in many ways. It's quite dense in terms of the lore of the world they're in. It's all based on this desert planet of Arrakis, also known as Dune, and it's about geopolitics, and it's about far future, a lot of stuff about, and not necessarily great stuff, but a lot of involved stuff about gender around matriarchal and patriarchal lines, and also fundamentally about environmentalism, ecology, and how the highly capitalist, highly feudalistic dependence on this one resource on the planet, and how everyone collapses around that.
Which is spice.
The spice, yeah, which makes everyone psychic and allows them to travel through space and time. So often considered potentially an unadaptable novel, because while the plot of it is will now be considered fairly structurally a space opera, fairly standard setting, dime a dozen in some ways, but the actual meat of it is really the philosophical and the ecological discussion that takes up huge swathes of the actual novel space. Was adapted into a very psychedelic and camp version by David Lynch in, I want to say, 1985? 84.
Starring Kyle MacLachlan.
Also Patrick Stewart, an early role for him.
We watched it a couple of years ago. I think we might have talked about it on the podcast. Yeah. I think it's truly, truly bad.
It is a cult classic, I think it's fair to say, even if it's not necessarily to some people's taste or good.
And I love David Lynch. Yeah. I'll watch anything by David Lynch, but this was neutered David Lynch by way of like tense textual density.
Yeah.
There's also there was an attempt by Alejandro Jodorowsky to direct who is a Chilean French filmmaker. In the 70s, he attempted to adapt Dune. We know this most famously because there's a very famous documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune, which I haven't watched yet, and I really would love to. But I believe the H.R. Geiger was on board to do a lot of the visuals for it, who did the visuals for Alien and stuff like that, which would have been absolutely incredible. Jodorowsky also directed The Holy Mountain, which is a very famous kind of avant-garde, insane movie, and he's actually been working recently, which is interesting because he kind of went off. He just disappeared for quite a while. But what do you think of it, Joe? Of Dune?
I enjoyed it. I liked it.
Yeah.
We mentioned, and people were aware of Denis Villeneuve's films, but like things like Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, probably the closest cousin to this film.
Prisoners,
very different
Sicario.
Film. Yeah. Sicario, actually a fairly popular one that people made.
Sicario is his most popular. I think it's his worst, personally.
Okay. So I enjoyed it. Dune, I guess, core as a text and as a world is epic. It is sprawling, and it's about sprawl and scale and waste and wealth. So seeing it in the IMAX theater with these like lush flowing like Titanic visuals, these huge CGI ships, these big vistas, these like very arch performances, this like faux Shakespearean kind of thing. It was a fantastic, I think, cinema experience.
Yeah.
And so much of it I thought was quite well done. I thought that the visual design in terms of making it seem convincingly like alien and like very much a society that the form does not have to follow the function, because they're post they're post reliant on that really. So there's a lot of strange kind of artistic shapes, very Geiger-esque. I thought that the sound design was challenging, but in a good way. It was like very intense at all times, and very symbolic.
Yeah.
And I think as a very dense story and world, I think they did a pretty good job of show don't tell for a lot of it, and a better job than the classic. Yeah,
I was able to keep track of the plot, which is a difficulty for me at the best of times. And I was able to keep track of it, though Joel had explained to me the plot beforehand, which was really useful.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you had that, you know.
Oh no, yeah,
I'm not going in.
But the starring Zendaya very briefly, unfortunately. I would have loved more Zendaya. And
Timothée Chalamet,
as well as Josh Brolin in a slightly minor character. Oscar Isaacs, Jason Momoa in a slightly larger role.
Josh Brolin actually playing the same character that Patrick Stewart plays, funnily enough.
Stellan Skarsgård as well, importantly. And the guy who you love.
Who I love? David Dalsman.
Yeah.
David Dalsman, who played the polka dot man in
Suicide Squad.
The Suicide Squad sequel.
Squad, yeah.
And also like a number of weirdos.
Yeah, he played the guy who is the like undercover, like he's pretending to be a police, but he's actually
a Joker agent.
A Joker agent in The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
So yeah.
My two main problems with Dune, my problems with the film are integral to the text.
Yeah.
The problems are that the story, like the story itself and the world predates to a certain extent, definitely science fiction written by men, any sense of like humanity, verisimilitude, personability, likability. These are big archetypal characters, and no one has a moment of no one has a candid moment in this text. And the second thing I would say is it's massively appropriative. So a huge amount of the imagery and the visuals of Dune borrow a lot. Like there is a certain sense that it's post humanity, so a lot of this has kind of
filtered
through, but there's a huge amount of Islamic imagery, of Middle Eastern imagery and culture that is,
and like it's a text that deeply relies on like indigenous stylings of things. Not to suggest that all indigenous peoples have a similar style, but like it's almost like a fetishization of like
it's a Western eye of something that's indigenous,
exactly, and a smoothed out indigenous kind of thing. And
the central motivating arc of Dune, and this is not a spoiler, this is what it's about, is that Paul, the main character, is a messianic figure who is not only the one man at the end of a line of women who can actually harness the power, but also the one like outsider, the one white man who can come into this indigenous population, and he is their messiah figure. So he is kind of a white savior and a male savior, kind of all in one. And we're meant to this is a text where we're meant to be like, great, yeah. And
my major issue with the movie is that he's played by Timothée Chalamet, and I think I do not like Timothée Chalamet as an actor at the best of times. I think he's at his best with Greta Gerwig, to be honest, and even then I didn't like him in either Little Women or Ladybug a huge amount.
He looks a bit like a bicycle seat.
Huh?
He looks a bit like a bicycle seat.
He does have the facial angles of a bicycle seat, but not one I want to ride on. I really dislike. I've gone on record as being majorly anti Call Me by Your Name for a long time. I really love the Sufjan Stevens tracks in it, but I do not like that movie in any way. I found it dull, bad, and not very queer, honestly. I know everyone hates it now as well because Armie Hammer is disgusting. So I'm really glad that everyone has now seen the light on that movie. But I do not like him as an actor. I found him at his worst in this movie. He's just a mumbling man-child, kind of following the wills of his visions and putting no thought, effort, emotion, or character into anything that happens. And that's unfortunately deeply written into the character of Paul Atreides. In some ways, he's a perfect person to put there because he has no personality. So, 0 + 0 = 0. Lovely. That's my major issue with that text. Visually beautiful. I think it's lacking saying something about humanity. Everything that Denis Villeneuve does says something about humanity. Prisoners, you have this deep obsession and losing your humanity and the ravages of grief and loss. Arrival is it says everything about what it is to be human and to live life with knowing that pain is oncoming Blade Runner 2049 says, like, you know, what is humanity after humanity? You know, stunning. This says, like, Paul Atreides is great lol. That's kind of the message of the movie. Brilliant, though. Stunning. Just doesn't have...
Absolutely worth seeing.
100%. I walked away, said 8.3, and I think it's grown to an 8.4 afterwards. After I got stopped being bombarded with the movie.
It certainly hasn't promised anything it hasn't delivered on.
Absolutely.
Like, as an adaptation
except for the fact that it's Denis Villeneuve, you know, he should have brought more to it, in my opinion.
I think at a certain point you start changing the text. Yeah,
Anyway,
look,
it's a great adaptation. It is a wonderful adaptation of a flawed text, I would say.
100%. So speaking of a man returning to save a line of women from themselves, Giles is in this episode.
Never ever speak about Giles and Paul Atreides in the same breath as if they are the same thing. Giles is an honorary woman. I can say that.
You can say.
I can say that as a gay.
You can bestow that, can you?
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
No.
Go on.
No, of course, this episode is it does have Giles returning, but of course it's about the Slayers taking the fight back to the evil, which is both in this episode and interestingly in this episode and in kind of the later stuff with the Shadow Men and all that is once again kind of characterized as him and as kind of like the structural, the kind of patriarchal and systemic forces. Yeah, and the Slayers are like, what if we did something else? You know? So and that really kicks off with this episode. So we have the. It's a very plot heavy episode, or plot progression heavy. We have Giles returning with 3 Slayers in tow. I'm going to make an effort to that we know their names as we go through. So we have Annabelle, who is the very rules following, crucifix wearing, I think more the posher English girl, and then Molly, who is the biscuit loving Scouser, I think, or
I don't think Scouser, but I think definitely Northern.
Yeah, and then we have obviously Kennedy, who is an ongoing character.
Yeah.
So Giles arrives with these potentials in tow, and we have basically a lot of conversation. We kind of explain what is a potential Slayer, various dozens, hundreds of them around the world waiting to be called when the primary Slayer is killed. These are being systematically wiped out by the Bringers, and that what she thought was interesting was they articulated that the plan is Council, Potentials, then Fate, and then Buffy, and if they do it in that order, essentially, that there'll be no one left to call in the world. Yeah,
I saw a couple of people being like, "Oh, you know, Buffy is actually wrong here because you know actually they go for Buffy first and then Fate." It's like this is all postulation. Who gives a shit?
Yeah,
you know, you haven't like gotten a message from them saying, you know, we're going to systematically go through the line. You know,
but also if you know, it's an interesting one because if they kill Buffy first, it shouldn't call a Slayer, but Buffy is the Slayer. So like, there's a reason why you isolate. Like her whole thing is her strength, is her collective. Yeah. So like you kill her last. Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't matter which one of the two of them you kill last anyway. It's good and like fascinating in lots of ways, and like, you know, as a concept, adding the potentials to this series I think is great in lots of ways. I think it's bumbled though, you know. I think they overload it too quickly. They're like a new potential every episode. Very few of them have any personality whatsoever.
They end up having an identifying like trait, which is kind of actually what you want to avoid with most. Like if you're writing women into your script, you don't want it to just be like the blonde one,
or like, you know, more egregiously the black one, and you know the like, you know, the Asian one, which is what they actually end up doing, and they end up like kind of like making them in like very much making them fit into these stereotypes, but also, you know, having one of your only black characters in your entire show be a potential, you know, i.e. well, we have to fill out all these roles, so I suppose a black one is just like incredibly painful and inappropriate. But I do like it as a concept, and I'm so fucking fond of just the direction of this season as a whole. As in, I think the way they do it is oftentimes not great, especially from this point onwards with like kind of military style Buffy. I'm not a huge fan of that. But when you like the conclusion of Chosen, absolutely lovely.
Yeah, I think it's a big swing, and I think it's not something they were wholly built for. But
it's funny you say that, because the image I always have of Chosen is that girl about to swing at the ball in a baseball game. You know, she's one of the like little potentials, and she's about to get the Slayer power. Yeah, that's always like the image of Chosen for me.
Yeah, it's very good. I like Buffy running over the rooftops. So Giles also introduces us. We basically codify the fact that this is like the first evil, and we have to have that kind of slightly odd lore conversation where everyone's like, "Oh, so you met this thing like 4 years ago?" And he's like, "Yeah." She's like, "Yeah, it was like one of the many things I killed, you know."
Yeah.
But now it's like something that is now more relevant. So they go back to the Christmas tree lot from amends. They find the pit there, and Giles gives, plays his role and gives exposition around how both what the first is and the records he saved from the council, how there's no council anymore, he is the council. And then when they encounter the Turok vampires, saying that they are, a primordial, entirely separate race of vampires that predate man.
Yeah.
Which it leads us into, as both the show and as the wider Buffyverse goes on, a lot of conflicting like timelines about like who the Turok actually are. I kind of enters into this like almost like pseudo evolutionary thing of like, but if we evolved from monkeys, how can monkeys still be here, kind of thing, But they're essentially very much based on the kind of the Kent Orlok from Nosferatu style bat-like vampirism that we see in the Master and we see in other older vampires. And yeah, they're presented as this particular Turok is presented as like a very formidable threat for Buffy.
I felt it as well. When Buffy gets into the Christmas tree lot, that whole moment is genuinely frightening when she does, like, she stakes the vampire and it does nothing and she is lost and she gets beaten, the crap beaten out of her. It is scary, it's threatening, and I remember watching this and being like, oh my god, how's Buffy gonna get out of this one?
Yeah.
And it's funny because maybe a lot of this is influenced by the fact that this was probably the first time, I was a bit older watching this than I would have been watching previous seasons. Like, as in, when you're that, this was coming out when I was 12, and like when you're that age, season 5 I would have watched when I was 10, So I just by this point I probably had more of an idea in terms of like empathizing with the characters and feeling like the oncoming threat and stuff. But by this point I was really like, oh my god, what's going to happen? How is Buffy going to deal with the Uber Vamp? Which is nice.
Yeah, 100%. I think it continues to, as a show, convey threat in a way that doesn't diminish it, because one of the things I always compare it to is, I might probably mention this before, but in Star Trek, people are fairly familiar with the Borg, and it's this like overwhelming threat, and the problem always been the more you use the threat and the more that they are defeated, they become diminished, and that is something that happened with Star Trek very much as it went on.
Yeah, which is nice because like the amount of Star Trek I've seen, I'm still slightly terrified of the Borg.
Yeah, and they should be. I think you can always, and obviously, Doctor Who with the Daleks and all that kind of stuff. And I think if you do something well, you can actually re-inject that fear. You can definitely reconstruct it.
Specifically with the episode Dalek from Doctor Who 2005, which was one of the first great Christopher Eccleston episode, I would say, where there is one Dalek. It is threatening and scary for the first time, and it's oh wow, cool.
100%. And actually, as an aside, as a little bit of a rep for this, that was actually based on a Doctor Who novel from the Wilderness years, from the pre-show, and a lot of the great stuff you will see oftentimes in Doctor Who and Star Trek is often based on stuff that fan writers or people who became script writers as fans wrote, and people were like, this is great, can we now develop it? Anyway, I just think,
I'm very excited I'm really excited for RTD to come back to Doctor Who.
Yeah, well, what a time. Yeah, time is a flat circle.
It's gonna be great. Like, there's real potential. Like, Russell T Davies is not like misstepped when it comes to TV making. Sorry, years and years I didn't love.
You didn't love, but like if that was something by someone you didn't know, you'd be like, this is pretty good. Yeah,
exactly. But like, It's a Sin, loved it. I really like Cucumber and what was the other one? Banana. And like, obviously major fan of Queer as Folk. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. Yeah,
so it's an exciting thing to tap into, that fan love. I think it comes through in this show very much as well. So we see that really the combat with the Turok and as you say, progression into as Buffy rallying at the end of this episode, we're not going to be on the back foot and just wait for the process. I think when she talks about taking it to the first and moving forward, I think what this is a conversation about is really rejecting the cycle and rejecting the questioning, Socratically speaking, the assumption that they could, like, good can't strike first, that you can't proactively go after this, that just because the first evil is the source of all evil means you can't fight it. She always is determined to to her last breath twice, like, question those assumptions.
Yeah.
And I think in the face of, like, you have this, you know, it's really brutal that in this first episode you have this, like, quite likable girl who is very
composed
and very young Buffy in a way, because she's very well put together, very church-like, and she has her crucifix and all that, and she really feels safe around Buffy, and she's killed, you know. And that's like, that could be crass, but it's handled in a way that, like, when she finds Annabelle, it's just, like, so sad, but so, like, she, like, Buffy isn't gonna break down about that, because she's just like, this is kind of the job.
It's deeply upsetting, but it's you're absolutely right in terms of, like, breaking a cycle. I think this is the beginning of, like, the setting the ultimate role for Buffy in this season and in this show is to recognize the cycles of patriarchy and of tradition, which are no longer useful, and to reject them and instead instill your own. So in this episode where she says, we've spent so many years on the back foot just trying to defend ourselves against these things, and we're not doing that anymore, and in fact we're going to bring the fight to the origin of all this. We are no longer going to be controlled by men, i.e. the council, and we instead of having this this one concentrated specific person who fights these things, I'm sharing this power with so many other people, and we will we are no longer doing the boring thing that you told us that we have to do. We're going to do our own version of it, and that's just so powerful and so good.
And the ultimate aim of any minority space, any queer space, or any feminist space is to make itself obsolete, and that's a very long view, but it's to create sufficient equity that it's no longer relevant to have these or these spaces will have to change into something else, which is
that's the thing. It's like, the ultimate queer agenda is to move from having to have support spaces for queer people and instead have, like, social spaces for queer people and, like, shared experience communication kind of thing, as opposed to, like, triage essentially, which is what I don't think people like to acknowledge it, but it is, as a queer community, where we still are, is, like, in the triage stage of like, some people are fine, a lot of people aren't, so we need to take
reacting, and occasionally being proactive.
Maybe we need to take it to the first evil and start making all the straights pay for what they've done.
That is the ultimate, the coded message here.
Apart from that, though, it is nice to have Giles back. We have this funny ongoing storyline where it's like a question mark about, is Giles physically here? He's not interacting with anything. He might be the first, and he's also quite, like, aggressive in his demeanor in this season, like, up until when it's confirmed that he was not killed. You actually see it from the first moment he appears in the doorway that the girl's rushing, and you can see Anthony Hegg taking a step back out of their way. So I think it's actually a great little thing, because it's very effortlessly done, that it's not distracting when you don't know what's happening, but as soon as you're like, oh, this is the uncertainty, you're like, it is very much in his performance the whole way through. It is, and it's well staged, and it's a good payoff. I like it, and it's just nice to have him back. I feel like Giles being back is giving a real balance to the cast and the characters that was really missing in season 6 and early season 7. He's physically here for the rest of the season, I believe, but he doesn't appear in every episode, just because the season after this is quite, like, scattered in nature. We get a lot of scenes focusing on, like, side characters, and because you're adding, like, a tremendous amount of characters in the potentials, you end up, like, with quite diffuse kind of episodes, I think, Joel, what did you make of the initial flarings of the Kennedy Willow interaction? What's your? I think we actually talked about this with Ian back in the day, but what's your ultimate opinion of Kennedy?
Yeah, see, I have no strong feelings about Kennedy. I know she's quite a divisive figure, because I think, is there a sense that she's a bit kind of like combative or abrasive through the season. But I feel like the only strong feeling I remember I have of Kennedy is of taking the scythe to Buffy in Chosen, because I've seen Chosen a few times, but I haven't necessarily seen the rest of the season to the same extent. I've no problem with it because so far, because on the other side of it, you have this, like, queer character who is being widowed, you know, and that's, like, the one relationship she gets. So actually, like, a lot of the main characters don't have, other than Buffy, a lot of the main characters don't have multiple relationships. They only really have, the one thing that they do. So I feel like I'm okay with the fact that we're continuing to have queer moments into this season.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people felt specifically that, like, this is no replacement for our lovely dear Tara, which, fair. and judged Kennedy on that basis. I do find Kennedy as a character like a little abrasive at times and a little like just as a character just a bit annoying, you know.
She's a teenager.
She's a teenager though. Well, we're not sure. Maybe
she's at most a teenager, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I get it. I have no major problem with it though, and I'm glad that the queer representation continues in the show. I think it's really important. So we have a moment in this episode where they're both on the stairs, and we noted, or you noted, it's shot on like an entirely different camera and visual profile to the rest of the episode. It's a really bizarre moment.
So on the stairs when Kennedy makes the joke or makes the like flirts with Willow and is talking about like hopefully she doesn't hog the sheiks. Mm-hmm. Both Kennedy's shot and the reaction shot are two different film stocks to the base recording. We're going to note, apologize, and continue that there appears to be like a search helicopter hovering over the house at the moment, which we can't control.
Yep. So the last thing I'd note is that there's quite a lot of amends kind of parts and just season 3 references floating through this episode just in general, appropriately. But and Mark Field writes about this, and I kind of have some notes based on that. But when you have like Angel being tortured in the original episode and challenged and kind of driven to suicide, essentially, you have a similar situation with both Spike and Willow in this episode. I found the Spike stuff very interesting to watch in lots of ways, but really the only note to take away from it is that Spike is being buoyed up by his by Buffy's faith in him, and that's kind of what's getting him through this torturing scene.
We do have Juliet Landau returns as Drusilla,
and did a really wonderful job, I thought, in the sense that she was playing not Drusilla, she was playing first as Drusilla, which is a slightly more nuanced character in the sense that she was more focused and more tortury rather than Drusilla. Obviously, is just such a floaty,
unfocused
person, or vampire. And then you have Joyce, and Willow as well has a moment of using magic and the first momentarily taking over her and kind of exploding energy jizz all over the place and knocking Anya back and stuff, and Willow being very upset by this, thinking that she's going to lose control again. And
we actually see the same horned demonic representation of the first from a man's burst out of Willow momentarily. Yeah,
exactly. As well, you have Joyce in this episode appear twice in Buffy's dreams. Not as the first, I don't think. As far as I can tell,
it's ambiguous. And certainly Buffy is concerned as the first, but I don't think the first ever appears in dreams.
Yeah, as far as I know, it doesn't.
Whereas Buffy does have prophetic and symbolic dreams.
Yeah. What is kind of like indicative of it not being kind of, it's certainly not Joyce, because one of the things that Joyce kind of goes on about is like, evil is everywhere, which very much echoes her speeches in Gingerbread in season 3, where she is hunting. She thinks that she can stop the kids being killed, whatever. And she has a similar speech there. But it's an interesting one to note the kind of the comparisons to amends. An episode which we didn't usually like, to be honest. Anyway. And actually, Elizabeth tweeted us, Shiny Red Ukulele, to say that Buffy did in fact interact with the first in that episode, which I had forgotten about in amends. So that is why she knows it.
I think we know it at the time. In retrospect, it's not an episode that sows the seed for a season-long conflict. Yeah.
Do you want to move into the dusting, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I have some Buffy bits for you. So, I've just noted that, Juliet Landau come back, wonderful. I love this device of having an ability to bring back loads of guest actors and fan favorites in the form of the first in the season. I think it's a little hollow in some ways, in the sense that as a fan you want to see the character, not a representation of them. But it's all good. Sorry, there's a dog sighing deeply behind us. Ludo is on the couch, blissed out entirely, snoring and with his feet up in the air because he's happy. Anyway, Iari Limon, I think is how, I have no idea how to pronounce her name. I feel a really bad name. But as Kennedy, just playing Kennedy, she is 2 years younger than Alison Hannigan, as I noted. So that's actually, as an actor, she was 24 or something like that, or 26 maybe, shooting this. So kind of that adds a bit of not awfulness to it. She is Mexican. She grew up in California, and she came out as bisexual in 2006. Which is lovely. Yeah. Annabelle, who plays a character of Annabelle, her actress played Elizabeth in Bioshock Infinite.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
This episode is happening around Christmas, as they note. This is which is 4 years after Amends, because that was also Christmas. So that's quite interesting as well. This is the final appearance of Christine Sutherland as Joyce, which is very upsetting in lots of ways. The title is a reference to a Police song, which I didn't know, but I believe. And the episode takes place in December, but Conversations with Dead People took place on November 12th specifically, and there's canonically 4 or 5 days in between the two episodes, in the sense that every moment has been accounted for. There's no like huge like empty space really, unless they think that, you know, Spike has just been tortured for weeks now.
Yeah.
And they've been waiting to kind of like action that, essentially, which is not what's implied, which is fine. I'm fine with a floating timeline when useful. But it's a funny one to note. Do you have any Buffy Bits, Joe?
Yeah, just a couple of things to note. I was curious, on questions rather than comments. I was curious as to why the Turok wear clothes and fight like martial artists if they're from the primordial age. And also, I very much enjoyed the scene where they were Dawn and Anya were teaming up to slap Andrew and then potentially throw some scalding water in his face.
Yeah, my favorite quote from that part was, "I was about to be dead." Tom Lang is Andrew. Genuine comedic force in this show.
Oh yeah, I think it's actually does great. Yeah.
Specifically, he's so great in this season. Like, I think in season 6 he's a bit like of a simp.
Yeah.
And in this season he's like really good fun.
There are some episodes where he makes so many Star Wars references that the Wikipedia just says Andrew makes many Star Wars references, where usually they would itemize them.
I loved when they everyone realized that Xander and Andrew are basically the same person, or the same like ilk, and Xander was disgusted with himself, and I was like, you should be.
Yeah, in this episode, yeah. And we get into like a very kind of, you know, classic kind of meta referencing of like Xander having to repeatedly board up the same window and all that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I also was curious about when they mentioned that they've searched through the Watcher's Codex for information on the Turok. It's like, that seems like something that would be handy to have hacked for the last 7 years. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember what point it was, but someone used the phrase encounter session. I have no idea what that is. I mean, neither did you, right? No,
it was something like, is this conversation turning into an encounter session? And it must be some relatively specific and potentially time specific American reference.
Yeah.
Something Johnny Carson said or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Fashion notes. So I have a couple here. Christine Sutherland looks just wonderful and beautiful, and I'm going to miss her so much. I love her so deeply. I think she's wonderful as Joyce. She's maybe my favorite character of Buffy, just full stop, to be honest.
Yeah, one of the guiding likes of the show, absolutely.
Yeah. I quite like Dawn's curly hair, and when she kind of does it up, it's quite nice. I actually quite liked Giles in his brown corduroy jacket. I thought it was quite fetching, even though it was quite a heavy corduroy. The Molly is wearing the fluffiest pink jacket I've ever seen, and I kind of liked it. And I think she would look like pretty good these days, in the sense that people would like her outfit.
In my head, Molly's wearing a Union Jack t-shirt, but I don't think that's true.
I quite liked Anya's brown fringe jacket, even though it's fringe. I thought it was kind of cool. Xander again is looking pretty normal. His clothes are like quite standard. I think it's because he's taking quite an adult role. Buffy in her second dream looks really businessy for absolutely no reason. I kind of like that. Willow's blue jacket with blue top, and it had like strings holding the neck closed, and it was really weird. I don't understand why you do that. And yeah, that's it. And I just noted another there, which probably should have been a Buffy bit, but the point at which Anya thinks that Giles killed all the council. I absolutely love that. Do you have any fashion notes, Joe?
Yeah, I just note that Drusilla, the first is Drusilla had a very interestingly kind of like more conservative version of the kind of the frilly medieval style dresses that she would usually wear. And we do spend this episode, I think a portion of future episodes, with Spike just strapped to a board in just his leather trousers, bleeding out. Yeah, which is definitely a whole look.
I think he comes back I think he's saved in the next episode. No,
I feel like he spends a season and a half on that board, but it's probably not that long.
Apparently, they dunk him. People have been like, sorry, what the fuck? Because he gets dunked in water, and people are like, vampires don't need to breathe, so that wouldn't do anything. And apparently, initially they had wanted to dunk him in holy water, and that was the thing, which would have been like his face burning off, essentially. And standards and practices said that they couldn't, so that's why you get this kind of slightly nonsensical scene.
Yeah, you can't just like shove a man's face in acid before the water.
Yeah, it's probably not a great idea. Okay, and death count. Do you have one first, Joe?
Annabelle, first victim of the Turok.
Hardly knew ye.
Yeah, rip. And yeah,
that's it.
Dead.
Okay, and Joel, do you have a rating for me?
Yeah, I would give this episode 7.5 falling pieces of inexpertly secured construction equipment.
Cool. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I thought it was an enjoyable episode. I enjoy the lore of this season. I like that Giles is back. I like the potentials, and I like the fight scenes. And I felt I'd forgotten that speech was in this episode, so that was quite rousing. I was roused by it. But again, it was kind of like very much the episodes become a little less distinct as it goes on. So it's like I enjoyed this part of it, but it will start to blend, I think, a little bit from here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is... I was also thinking 7.5, weird with a beard, out of 10. I think that we're going to get a lot more episodes like this. This first one, absolutely grand. But yeah, I think this is the beginning of a trend. I enjoyed it well enough. I definitely agree that the Buffy speech at the very end was really rousing and really brought it up. And the image of Sarah Michelle Gellar beaten up there and then being like, is she going to die?
Yeah.
Like bizarre, but also, scary. But yeah, really good. Or not really good, quite good. Should we move on to the Cordelia Chase?
Yeah, so over on the Cordelia Chase, we have Awakening. Following on, again, strange that they are asynchronous, because this is very much, again, a series of 3 or 4 days in a row for Team Angel. Mm-hmm. But what they want to do is they very quickly come onto the idea, I think very, very quickly, that what they need to do is bring forth Angelus by removing Angel's soul, because Angelus might have a recollection of how to defeat the beast. So Angels is essentially reverse psychologies into doing this, and they find a mystic who can remove and, more importantly, restore the soul, Wo-Peng, and they do this whole thing of how dangerous Angelus is. Let's chain him up in this big metal box. Wo-Peng starts the ritual, and then immediately it turns out he's actually a baggy, tries to kill Angel, and Angel saves himself, breaks out. And essentially, spoilers for this episode we've just watched, but everything from when Wo-Peng starts the ritual is a vision, a fantasy sequence that Angel is experiencing, with the aim being to give him a perfect day in which he would lose his soul from happiness. So what follows is actually kind of an interesting aside as an episode, because the aim is that for the episode that they, the Wo-Peng stuff kind of very quickly leads them on to, okay, there was actually this ancient ogre who fought the beast, and they created this sword that could defeat him, the Fang of Muad'Dib or whatever it was, and Angel, in the course of finding this in a secret location, has some reconciliation with Wesley, with Connor, who he makes amends with. Cordelia eventually forgives. They confront and fight the beast. They manage to destroy it, and him and Cordelia have a very protracted lovemaking session, during which he shouts out Buffy, and loses his soul. And then we cut back to the real world, and we see that the ritual is now complete. His soul is contained in something akin to an orb of Thesla. And there's this like long sequence of Angelus like laughing at the fact that he's now free. And why I think it's interesting is that it actually requires to work well, and I don't know if it works well or works poorly, but requires quite a clear understanding of what your show is currently doing, because it has to be, for what they're doing, it has to be a realistic enough sequence of events that the audience isn't immediately like, this is a dream sequence. And also the reconciliations need to, because you want the surprise at the end of the episode, so the reconciliations have to seem earned, and they have to seem, it has to be devastating to a certain degree when that's taken away. It's like, oh, none of this actually happened, and we're still in the beast's world. And what it means is that some of the character development, some of the things that happen in this episode that is meant to be portrayed as almost in retrospect unrealistically easy for how things work out is actually how things often work out on this show.
Yeah.
It's not far beyond the realms of possibility for this episode to be like, oh, there was just a Sorg somewhere that could do this, you know?
Yeah.
And also it means that the reconciliations that he makes with Connor and Wesley and Cordelia never actually get to happen on the show.
Yes.
You know, because those things spin out in other ways. But it actually felt like this has been quite like a dreary arc and quite like a grim, everyone hates each other period of time. So like there was actually something nice about him finally like getting out Wesley and be like, maybe we can get back to all that. So there is, that was taken away. It's like, I feel the impact of that, but maybe not entirely for the reason intended, you know?
Yeah.
So they accidentally constructed a better episode in some ways.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, I mean, the way this episode goes kind of like repairs a lot of the damage that the last couple of seasons of Angel have done. And you're like, oh, wait, maybe you should have done that actually, to some degree, you know, finding a way to have, like, I mean, one of the things about TV, and especially serial TV in this way, is that we log in to watch our characters we like interact with each other and enjoy each other's company in a lot of ways. That doesn't mean you can't have conflict. I mean, like, one of my favorite arcs of any television show is in Gilmore Girls when Lorelai and Rory stop talking to each other, and that creates like this really sad, really lonely time period. But like they're finding other ways to interact with other people. Whereas in this arc, it kind of feels like everyone's just kind of shouting at each other. There's no interaction, which is like an enjoyable friend in the TV box interaction, which makes for, I think, bad viewing.
And also one of the odd things is there's character development moments, like Wesley touches Fred's arm and all this kind of stuff, and stuff that happens within the dream world, which Angel isn't necessarily present for, or isn't engaged with. So as a writing exercise, it's an interesting one to unpick, and like it's fun to watch, like some of the stuff. So that's just some special effects that weren't too bad. But yeah, maybe like I'm gonna say a 6 failed feminist gestures by virtue of the fact that like they actually kind of, rather than it being a payoff at the end, it kind of feels like a bit of a reset or cheat. Yeah.
I was going to go 7 failed feminist gestures, which is funny because during the episode I was telling you that I didn't do much for me.
Yeah. I'm only deducting it because I think this episode being placed in the season as written,
it's also like quite an interruption pace wise.
Mm-hmm. And what does lead us into is like this whole thing of like, this is actually the only time in Angel, and that I stand to be corrected, but for a real and serious period of time they bring back Angelus. And that's like the one thing you do at Angel as if you pitch that show, yeah. So like, and they kind of take it seriously, and I think at the end of this thing potentially Willow comes to help restore his soul.
Interesting.
So because I think it's might be just post Chosen maybe, or so. I'm not sure how it lines up.
Yeah.
But Willow I think definitely takes part in kind of restoring his soul. So I don't know. I think that's interesting.
It is, yeah, and it definitely doesn't go past Chosen, because if you think about it,
that doesn't make sense. Maybe there is another episode later on, but Chosen
was that summer. This is he's only a couple episodes.
But I think they take the Angelus.
I'm going for feminist gestures.
Okay, cool.
Like, you know, I think it was good, but a little hollow overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, that brings us to our conclusion for this week's episode.
Great.
Okay, folks, thanks for joining us. Apologies for the near constant aerial supervision of the house during this episode, but we hope you enjoyed it.
Apologies, there's a day late as well.
Yeah, but you know, we were working. We're late, yeah. Also, I was working the whole weekend, so I think that probably contributed.
It really did, and we both work full-time jobs, so
yeah. You know. No one's fighting us on this.
No, they're not.
Thanks for being so understanding.
Exactly.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. Tell your friends. Tell the potential father figures / evil ghosts in your life. And we will see you next time right here, dear listener, on Buffy Boys.
That's where we'll see you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.